Our next speaker, Stephen Covert. Did I pronounce that right? I always mispronounce that. Okay. Steven's coming from Highlights for Children. He's a manager of vendor services there. And he's going to be talking about how to best utilize Microsoft's VDI. I know they don't make it easy, so we appreciate you coming in.
Good afternoon. I'm going to be talking about Microsoft licensing and basically specifically to VDI, virtual desktop licensing. For me, the reason I did it was I was when I first started doing this. Thank you. When I first started doing this, I didn't understand Microsoft licensing, and worse yet, I didn't know how to solve the problem and understand how to actually find out what the licensing was. So I saw a need of educating people, and when I saw VDI, I saw that the confusion regarding licensing was even more so. So I decided to create this presentation, and with that, I'll go ahead and get started. What I want to do as far as the agenda is first I want to define what virtual desktop infrastructure is and how it fits into the Microsoft desktop virtualization. Those two different terms, and we'll be hitting those in a couple seconds. And then the next thing, presenting Microsoft's virtual desktop infrastructure and their product offerings. And then finally how that relates to their licensing. And then we'll end up with question and answers. Okay? Any questions? Okay. How many people, and we haven't defined VDI, how many people are doing VDI presently at projects? How many have it on the roadmap right now? Okay. There's a lot of different solutions out there. Chances are, even if you don't choose a Microsoft solution, which this is going to be, there are going to be components of this presentation that's going to will benefit you. Okay. So first is desktop virtualization, and it's a computing architecture that allows the separation of the personal computer components, that being the data, the application, and the hardware, our operating system, from each other and from the physical desktop. Okay, so it's the ability to separate those components, those three components. Whereas we couldn't do that traditionally. And then VDI, or a virtual desktop infrastructure, is really a subset of that, and it's taking it one step further, which is the main components are you have a client, and you have a server, and then you have a connection between the two so that they can communicate. And your server has the desktop running on it. Okay? Any questions? Okay. Here's just a picture, an example of what traditionally the desktop looked like versus what it does with virtualization. Okay. The traditional desktop, as you can see, which you can all remember from years back, you had the piece of hardware, you had the OS, the application, and the data, and they were all tied to that specific desktop. With virtualization, each one of those components are separated or can be separated from each other, and they do not have to run on the same equipment at the same time. Okay, so they can be moved around. Okay, and during this presentation, what I wanted to do is this is desktop virtualization. There's 3 or 4 different general types, and first we have local versus remote. And with local versus remote, the local is if the virtualization is running on the client or the desktop. Okay, that's one component. The other is the remote, and that is where the virtualization is actually running in the data center somewhere. Okay, and we are going to be talking more about the remote today. We're actually going to be talking exclusively about the remote virtualization. And so the desktop is running in desktop, or processing is occurring in the server in the computer room. And so we'll be talking specifically along the top. There are 2 types of virtualization. There's operating system, operating based, which is on the left-hand side. That's your traditional VDI, what the industry calls VDI. On the right, which we're also going to talk about today, is the remote application virtualization or session host. Components right here that when you have an application get embedded into the operating system. When that occurs, that means that your operating system cannot be, or your application cannot be moved away from that operating system. Okay? So one of the things that you can do, or the way they solve that, is they have a product called a sequencer. And that sequencer is that right there. And you actually run a sequencer when you are actually installing an application. And what that sequencer does is it observes the changes that are happening in the operating system. Okay? And then after it observes the changes, it creates a package with that application, and it actually takes those the changes that occurred to the operating system and bundle it with the application. The other component of the virtualization that I wanted to talk about, which was the quadrant in the left side, is the operating system virtualization. And in this particular case, whoops, you see you have a server, and it's not real visible what that is, but it's a hypervisor. And a hypervisor is nothing more than a thin piece of software that runs on top of the server or desktop. And it communicates to the server, the hardware, on behalf of the virtual machines that are running on top of it. So you see here, you have a possibility of where you have multiple VMs or operating systems running on the same server, okay? So it provides the ability to run more than one operating system on a server or a computer. Okay, now that we've defined the application and operating system virtualization, I wanted to talk through the two top quadrants. The first one was the session host that we talked, and you can see, oops, we have the application-based virtualization. Here's an example of that, and there's three main components to application virtualization. There's the end device or the desktop, a server that has applications running on it, and those sessions are running on one single operating system. And then there's a connection broker that connects the client to the server, okay? So each of the clients that signs on to a connection, uses the connection broker, they each have a session, so they have their own desktop, but they don't have their own operating system. Okay? The next is the OS-based, which is your VDI solution. And you can see here you have the server running, and then on top of that you have a hypervisor that's running on top of that. And you see you have different VMs with a desktop. Each one of these represents a desktop. And these clients over here could be connecting to a single desktop, or this client could be connecting to multiple desktops. Okay? Okay, now that we have defined virtualization, and that being the session host and also VDI, I wanted to do a little primer on the licensing. And there are the three main components that we just got done talking about: the desktop, the server, and remote desktop services. But there's also a component called software assurance. And many of you know it as maintenance or something like that. And that software assurance provides benefits, and one of those benefits is virtualization rights. Microsoft appears to be moving more and more towards linking virtualization with the software license benefits. So we'll be talking a little bit more about what that is here in just a second. As an example, you're in a coffee shop somewhere and you have a kiosk that provides you, as long as you're the primary user of that desktop that's covered with SA, it provides you with the capability of accessing a VDI session and running that from a non-company device. What it doesn't provide is if you're the primary user and you have a tablet and you want to use that tablet and you're in a conference room in your company and you want to access a VDI session, you are not allowed to do that. So one of the components is you are not allowed to access a VDI from a third-party device if you're on your own premises. Okay. Any questions on that one? That one usually raises the biggest eyebrow twitch there when I mention that. Any questions? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Well, we'll be getting that in just a second. And then also it provides the capability of a Windows thin client software. What it is it's really just a stripped down piece of software that you can run on old hardware. So if you don't want to actually commit to buying a thin client that is hardware based, you can acquisition old hardware and run your thin client and run it that way as opposed to running a full version of the Windows operating system. Also, just to throw in here, the same roaming rights, if you cover these three products, your Office, your Visio, and your project with SA, you have those same roaming rights that I just mentioned for the operating system. Okay? Now there's three ways of getting these VDA rights. There's three different methods. The first one is the purchase of a Windows licensed device. You purchase a Windows licensed device, or license it, and then you provide it with active software assurance. And that operating system has to be professional. It has to be Windows Professional, okay? Then what that does then is it provides you with the right to upgrade to Enterprise. Okay, so that's the way that you can get it through the traditional SA method. Now recently they've added two other methods, and this is to answer your question. There's a VDA Windows Virtual Desktop Access license. It is a subscription. You buy that, and basically what the VDI subscription is for is, one, is if you have a device that you don't have rights to use roaming rights for, but you have a device that's a non-qualified license, the professional, so any other type of operating system or anything like that, or you have a non-company device that you want to license. So it's those two things. So if you have a consultant that has their desktop and they want to bring it in, that's one manner in which one reason you would use this. The other is if you have an embedded chip or a Linux system or something like that you want to attach to VDI, that would be another reason you would use it. And here recently, Microsoft just introduced a third method, and that's through Windows Intune. How many people have used or know what Intune is, even? Okay, well, good. It's Windows Intune is a cloud-based, it's out of their Azure offering. It's a cloud-based desktop management system, okay? If you cover one of your desktops with Windows Intune, you also get the VDA rights. We have a full front-end to back-end solution for licensing here is represented. I broke it down into all three of the components and the software assurance. So you would have the Windows 7 Professional, and you would be licensed for that, and then you would add software assurance, which would give you the virtualization rights. But it also gives you the right to run the Enterprise 7, which if you're going to be doing that remote FX, you would have that capability there. Additionally, there would be the software assurance benefits that we had discussed already. And you have to license your Windows servers, your Windows CALs, or external connectors if need be. And then your VDI suite, or the alternative would be the RDS CALs, and you could add the System Center Virtual Machine Manager. And if you want to have the roaming rights, you would also have these products. For these products, you would also be covering those with SA. Okay. So we define basically what a desktop virtualization is, and specifically VDI, and Microsoft's product offerings, and their licensing in with that. Any questions? And there's my contact information if you want additional information. Yes?
Can you put this in context of, you did this at your company, and...
Actually, we are just starting down this right now. What I did was, a year ago, I did a presentation at the ITAM, the International IT Asset Management Group. And it was it was a little larger than this. It was actually towards desktop virtualization, but with the amount of time I had here, it was too much to cover, so I cut it down to VDI specifically. Okay, and really it was a way for me to learn and then also prepare for when my company was going to be doing it. We're starting to think about it, but the one thing that, and this is this is something that you really need to be thinking about before you get into VDI. You need to have a really good management of your desktop before you start venturing into VDI. I mean, key point, and you also have to have a clear understanding of how your users are going to be utilizing VDI. So I really did this for a presentation and learning purposes and to be prepared for when my company was getting ready to do that. And as it ends up, we're definitely starting to talk about doing VDI. We right now have VMware as our hypervisor, as most of the people do. We are honestly starting to look at Hyper-V, and if you look at the Hyper-V 3 coming out, there's some really good enhancements that you may want to look at. I think you know, they're becoming competitive. Microsoft is becoming competitive, so it might be under consideration.